So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Julian Forder, and I have the pleasure of chairing this session this afternoon. We've got an hour, which is not a great deal of time, so we'll push straight ahead. I won't go into too much details. We've got three, potentially four. Are you going to double act? Or? Four speakers this afternoon. And what we're going to try and do is keep the presentations relatively brief. This is supposed to be an interactive session. We'll have the speakers say their bit, take questions relating directly to those presentations, more around clarification, hopefully, and then with high hopes, we'll have some time at the end for a more general discussion around methods. So without further ado, and she needs no introduction, Jill Manthorpe is going to present.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm presenting today with another hat on, which is as chair of the User and Carer Practitioner Group for the school. And I've been asked to look at methods, both from the perspective of the group, but also to comment on the whole suite of research that's been done. So that's an easy thing to do in about 10 minutes. But the great thing is that when people do research for the School for Social Care research, they are asked to produce a methods note. And the methods notes are small and they are confidential to the school. But we've had the opportunity to read them, to think about them and to digest them. And here are some of the key messages arising from these methodological notes. They, of course, bear very little resemblance to the methods section that you would see in the articles that come out from the school, which always assume that the research was able to do this, and this is what we decided to do, and it all worked like clockwork. And you and I know that when you actually write that bit for an article, it needs to look like that, but the real life is different. And so I'm going to be thinking about those particular areas if I can get this to work. Is there a... Yeah, I know that. Clicking everything that's clicking. It worked fine earlier on, didn't it?
Does this thing not work? This next thing.
And this bit doesn't go in the methods either, does it? That
it's an example of it not going to plan, exactly. Yeah.
I could, yes. But the key point of the slides is that they have some really good jokes in. So, yes. And you're going to miss the first one if this doesn't work, which is my very favourite cutting from The Guardian recently. So, or not.
You can go with this one.
I can. Great. So this is my cutting from The Guardian recently, which listed a list of stressful occupations. And you won't be surprised to know that they didn't actually reflect the picture in The Guardian, because it said the most stressed people in health and social care were social workers, and it was human services, so it included teachers, fire brigade, paramedics, vets, clerical and admin, management, prison officers, and ninth was researchers. And I thought that was really great, wasn't it? Researchers have made it. We're in the top 10 most stressed professions. And I often display this to people working in frontline services just so they don't feel alone and they feel we share their pain. And of course it makes you think, why are researchers stressed? And I think really perhaps the key thing is that the compromises that researchers make between what they want to do, which is about rigour and scientific excellence and everything like that, and the real world of research, and no more real is social care than is the world of social care. So the school has done a number of things to focus and bring itself up to speed with what is seen as rigour and studies that exemplify that, and also turn to different methods. So one of the first things the school did was to produce a series of methods reviews, but also, as I said, to capture those methods notes from the early studies and the continuing studies to say what people really had to do along the line. And I'll be reflecting on some of those during the course of this. First thing we realised was that when you are in big science and everybody tells you to be very international, that is extraordinarily difficult in social care. So researchers, few of them could do systematic reviews. Not that they couldn't work systematically, but when you looked for the gold standard articles that discussed a certain approach to dementia in care homes, or discussed homelessness, or discussed people in the criminal justice system with learning disabilities, there wasn't a lot of international evidence out there. So in the main, the studies from the school have focused on what's been called scoping reviews. And I don't think there's too much a difference between a scoping review and what Chris Whitty was talking about, which was a synthesis of the evidence. So I'm going to change now scoping to synthesis with capital letters and hope that I'll be doubly impressive when I can put these on the table. Maybe no more systematic reviews. Everything's done systematically, but actually what we want is the synthesis. In social care, of course, we spend a lot of time talking about definitions, and people commented on the really hard work to say what was a dom care agency, what was end of life, what was this, what was the measure of quality of life that was being used, and so on and so forth. Very difficult to translate internationally, isn't it? You spend a lot of time saying, is this an assisted living care facility? Is it a long-term care facility? A whole range of different approaches there. And I think that explains one of the outcomes of the school's projects, is that very few of them have managed to publish in international journals that are not UK edited. We all like to say that all UK journals are international in scope, but really, when we're talking about the big, heavy hitters, the high-impact journals, a lot of those are American, edited, and if you've spent 5,000 words telling people what social care is, you've not got too much room for your findings. So the school appreciates that. It is happy to have articles in Ageing in Society, British Journal of Social Work, because that reaches the practitioners in a sort of Carlsberg way. But of course, when they externalise on it, there are not too many in the Lancet or the journals of gerontology and so on and so forth. As I've mentioned, the school did a series of methods review, which I think have assisted us to think about how different methods do and don't get used in social care research. We did some on large-scale data sets, some on qualitative studies, some also on randomised control trials and their applicability to social care. And those, I think, have laid the foundations and have been used increasingly in teaching. Clearly, we don't know what people use in teaching, and of course, as a student, we don't know what students read. But we are beginning to get a sense, I think, through citation tracking, that these have been effective. So one message from the school is that in methods, we have kept largely UK-focused, and apologies to the UK, because by saying that, really, I mean that we've kept English-focused. What have the popular methods been? It won't be surprising to you to know that case studies have been done, and perhaps not done to death, but they've been done in a number of ways. But when we say case studies, they have been different types of cases. And indeed, using the word case is a bit odd in social care. They're case studies of areas, local authority areas or districts or smaller parts thereof. Case studies of providers. And we've often talked about social care providers as though they're a great homogenous blob, but they're not. They are many, many different organisations with long histories, short histories, work in different ways, and so on and so forth. You know that. We've done case studies of work units, or as in social work and social care, we usually talk about teams or shifts or so on. But we're focused on them sometimes as the unit of analysis. And also, of course, talked about case studies of carers and users, both of whom have been extraordinarily rich data sources, and ones of which we've not really made much of in social care before, partly because of fears about anonymity, but also that idea that what could you learn from one individual rather than you need to generalise. I think we've learnt a lot from individual examples. Interviews have probably been the method of choice. People like doing interviews. People like to do them, mostly they're one-off. Generally, they've been face-to-face. A very small number of studies have begun to do them by Skype and other trademarked communication tools. Very few of them have been longitudinal. Some studies have been, and we'll come on to these later on, but longitudinal, going back to people, asking them to reflect on their views, has not been so often. Partly, I think, because of the resources, but also the time limits of the school's research frame time, in which you can't have a 5-year study, really, by the time the money gets and the contracts get organised. Some interviewers have gathered quantitative data, and that has enriched the social care data, I think, because we know where people are at. When we talk about people with dementia, that's a huge range, isn't it? Or somebody with a learning disability, we know very little about them other than that label. And the quantitative data has enabled us to place them both in a clinical setting, but also in their social and their stage of their transition or the stage of their long-term condition more than it has done in the past. And a few studies have been observational and have shown us that it is possible, have assured us of the ethics of that, but have been great in getting beneath the surface of, I went to a care provider and it did this and the other. How did people analyse what they were doing? It won't be a surprise to you, perhaps, to know that everybody loves framework analysis with a capital F and a capital A. This, I think, is the most common form of analysis going on. It suits its purpose for small to medium studies. It's transparent. People learn a lot from it. It's very good for coding those interviews that I've talked about. If you didn't do that, probably people have done thematic analysis and a variety of approaches to thematic analysis, I think, if you look beneath the surface. Some people have experimented more in social care by doing conversational analysis, and we've learnt a lot about what social care practice is, because it's mainly conversational, when people have shown us the reality of the conversation, which has to be done in a tight time frame, has to have a purpose, but also has to have meaning for both of the people taking part in it. And when I mean both people, sometimes there are carers involved as well. But lots of untangling's needed. We still know that there are issues in saying how is the subject of the research being defined and what is it that you're measuring and how do you know the direction of progress that the details mean. Who was recruited in research and how were they recruited? Everybody does try and explain to us in their methods how that happened, but we know that there's been a lot of snowballing going on. Snowballing was such a great word, wasn't it, to get invented for that process in which you ask somebody to ask somebody. It's been really helpful in our lives. We don't know too much about how the numbers of people that have been involved in studies have reflected the general population, and particularly we don't know how the practitioners that have been interviewed, taken part in research, reflect their wider practitioner cohorts. We don't indeed know much about practitioners, despite it being a very practice-focused school in itself. And that, I think, is something we're learning, that when we say practitioners, we need to bottom that out and just say, who do we mean? Does it mean somebody with an ology, or does it mean somebody who's happening to do that work in the school holidays or something like that? Separating care-related and other stresses, pulling those together. Partly people have done it, but often a lot of studies have not asked the really difficult question in social care, which is about money. For a long time now, I've realised that you can ask people questions about their sex life, you can ask them about a whole range of things, but asking people about money is really difficult, isn't it? About household income. Maybe today's news and everybody publishing their income in the daily papers will change all that, but I don't think so. It really is a touchy subject. And lastly, we've had some studies that have been really excellent at collecting cost data and elements of where costs can get attributed to, but not all studies have done so, and a lot of studies have not been able to work out where costs fall. So, what were the surprises from looking at all these methodological overviews, the methods overviews? First surprise, how little case records have been used in social care research, if we take this as sort of typical of social care. Why is it when we say to practitioners, what do you do? They say, I do a lot of recording, I'm entering things on a machine, I'm writing up care plans and so on. Why is it that researchers don't focus on this as the major outcome of their work? I'll give you an answer to that. It's often extraordinarily messy to do, isn't it? It was much easier when everybody had a file and you could look through it, but looking through somebody's electronic record is really difficult, and you need to know the passwords and the cryptic bits for this and so on and so forth. And if you're working multi-agency, guaranteed as eggs are eggs, there won't be similar case recording systems. So case records remain that black box in social care. We don't use them very often, and Particularly, we don't try and marry up records from different places and different spaces about things. We sometimes manage to get the post-its, which I think is still the record of choice in many settings, but even then we fail to think about them in research terms. We've not been so good about linking up with large data sets, partly because the data sets, when you look at them, appear to be slightly fragile, don't they? When you look in depth, as I've been doing recently about learning disability social workers, I can't find out where they are. It's no use saying, look at a large data set. I've looked there, they just aren't visible. And a lot of social care remains that rather private area, particularly even in its own data sets, let alone anybody else's. And lastly, we haven't tied many records, many interviews, many case studies with the wider world that people live in, whether it's their health, careers and contexts, what about their housing situations, and very few studies have ever been able to look at children's records and family records to get some idea about people not just arriving in adult social care, but having that long, perhaps, involvement with children's and educational settings. So, no one right answer. Many studies, when reporting in their methodological notes to the school, said it all changed during our research. You won't be surprised by that. Places got reorganised, some of them went bankrupt, other of them were kicked off the CQC register, other places that something happened, non-specified, a whole context of change, and particularly the change in local authorities' ability and capacity and capability of assisting us in research. People left middle management posts that were often the entree for researchers. If you knew the team leader, you knew the middle manager, they were the people who were able to fix things, and they have often gone. That has been, had a great effect on studies. Most described user and care engagement very well. People get that in social care, don't they? They don't often need people to say, have you thought about it? Less so around practitioners, and less practitioners were the focus of the study. So the OT-based studies recruited OTs. The social work-orientated studies have had a lot of involvement from social workers. Far harder to get care assistants, to get people working in respite services, to get people working as PAs involved in studies, and their representative organisations are not as large and as powerful as the professionals. So what did researchers have to be? They described being flexible. This is a great word, isn't it? We changed things as we went along. We were flexible. We were accommodating. We realised that this wasn't going to work. And equally, they were imaginative and creative. If plan A didn't work, plan B didn't work, there was always going to be plan X, Y, and Z that they'd talked about, or if that not, they had a meeting and discussed that there. So they made compromises, and maybe that explains that stressor that I talked about earlier, about that continual need to make the compromise between rigour and reality. The school appreciated those communications. It really altered what the school commissioned. When people told us time and time again, we did a survey, national survey, and got a rather dismal response rate, we stopped saying, let's all do national surveys. It just isn't going to work. And that has been a really good listening point for the school, and I think for other bodies as well, other commissioning bodies in research. I've got to now draw to a close. Everything I say is not the responsibility of the government, the NIHR, the School for Social Care Research, blah, 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 blah. But fortunately, everything they say is not my responsibility either. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. So time for a couple of questions, hopefully around just clarification points, as we are a bit pressed for time. Anybody, anything burning they want to ask Jill straight away?
All clear.
No, absolutely. But that's good. Time to read it later. Right, so now we have Maureen Crane and Louise Jolly, who are going to talk about their homelessness, or formerly homelessness study.
Thanks. We've been asked to talk today about maintaining contact with marginalised and hard-to-reach population for a study. We're drawing on a study we did of the resettlement of homeless people, single homeless people, and their experiences and outcomes over time. The study was conducted in London, Sheffield, and Nottinghamshire and Leeds. And initially, it actually formed two studies. The first study was called For Home, and we interviewed homeless people when they were first rehoused. We interviewed them when they first moved, and then after 6 months, and then after 18 months. Oh, sorry. We then managed to get further funding to do the Rebuilding Lives study, which is the main focus of this presentation. And we interviewed the same participants 5 years after they were rehoused. And for this study, there was a sample of 297 people. The For Home study was funded by the SSCR and the Rebuilding Lives by the School for Social Care Research, and I think everyone's familiar with the disclaimer. From the start, we knew that it wasn't going to be easy to keep in contact with homeless people who are rehoused. We know there's a high mobility among the group. Some move from one place to another place, some move between housed and homeless states. Some are distrustful and hard to engage. Many are fairly isolated and not in contact with family, friends or services. And so at the outset, from the very start, we had to develop strategies to try and maintain contact with people. So one of the first steps was I went out to Detroit and met some US researchers who had carried out this type of studies, keeping in touch with people, and we learned a lot from them. From the start, we collected details at every interview with the participants about any information they could give us about address, phone numbers, emails, anything they had. And we also asked them for the details of any relatives, friends, support workers who could be approached. And we updated that at each interview. And what we found was over time, as people got to know us, they actually were willing to give us more information about relatives or parents that we could contact. And we renewed this every time we saw them. They were also given contact slips and free post envelopes at each interview and asked to return them or to ring or text us if their details changed. And they had a wallet we gave them with our contact details inside. And every year we sent Christmas cards to them with contact slips and free post envelopes asking them to return it, and we're still doing that at the moment, and this year we've had quite a number come back. So when we wanted to do the interviews for the Rebuilding Lives study, there was quite a long gap between when we'd seen them at 18 months, and we were now going to see them at 5 years, 60 months. There was a gap of 42 months. So first of all, we tried to contact the participants and try any of the contact details they'd given us. What we found was a lot had lost their phones, changed the phones. 2 people had actually changed their names, their forenames and their surnames, but we did manage to find them. We also, if we couldn't find the participant directly, we contacted the relatives or friends that they'd said we could contact, but we actually found a lot of these had either moved or changed their phone number. So we actually spent some time trying to find the relatives and friends as well. We also did a lot of door knocking if we couldn't get any information at their last known address, and talked to current occupiers and neighbours. And it was also a way of finding out whether the property was still lived in or not. And we contacted support workers and agencies that they said we could contact if they gave us permission. And there again, we found that some workers had moved on, some hostels or day centres had closed. So if we weren't able to contact them through these routes, we then went to additional methods, and we did ever such a lot of internet searching. We had to pay and register with the electoral roll, and we did searches of the electoral roll. Some were registered on it, some weren't. We did searches of court hearings and death indexes. We did general internet searches, and through newspapers we found information about 2 of our people who were in prison, and we found further information about someone who'd left the country. We also registered on social media sites and did a lot of searching and sending messages on Facebook, Badoo, and we actually found 14 people through this route. And we also did searching and sending messages on job hunting sites and found 2 people with this route.
I better move this up. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the strategies that we use to encourage continued participation in the study. So we were lucky over the 5 years that we had pretty much the same interviewers working. So we always tried to keep the same interviewer where possible to interview the same person. There was just a few people where that wasn't possible. We were also really flexible. I mean, we had to be really Jill talked about flexibility. I tell you, we were very flexible in arranging interviews to meet participants' needs and preferences. You know, so we had to fit in around people's working hours, college hours, drinking patterns. If they were drinking heavily, we'd go first thing in the morning. And other things. I mean, for example, one interview we had to do, we started the interview and then the person wanted to go and get their methadone from the chemist. So we waited in the flat with the friends while he went off and got the methadone and then came back, and then we carried on the interview. So all sorts of different things we had to work around to, to try and arrange to see people and to continue the interview. We also had to be really persistent, but I'd like to call this gentle persistence with people. So we didn't stop trying to arrange an interview until someone said, no, I really don't want to do it. And also we actually would actively say to someone, we've contacted you, quite a long time, quite a lot of times now over a few months. Are you sure you want to see us? You don't have to see us. It's really fine. It's voluntary. But people would often say, yes, I want to see you, but I can't see you now. So, the persistence did pay off but we had to, be very gentle with it and, tailor it to the individual and the individual's needs. Sorry, I'm not speaking into the mic. We also gave incentive payments as well at each interview. So the money went up over the 5 years. We started, I think, at £10 for the baseline, 15 for the 6 and 18-month interviews, and then by 5 years we gave people £20 in cash for the interview as well. Oops. So as you can imagine, the fieldwork took quite a long time. It took longer than we originally anticipated. It took 13 months in total, and that included a short extension to the study. And these figures are basically, we worked out the number of days from the first time we tried to phone somebody or email them or whatever, or write to them, to the date that we actually did the interview. So we did quite well, because 53% we could actually get hold of within the first month of contact. But then, as you can see, it drops off. But then we're still getting people. So this is showing the persistence was paying off, because, we got another 17% in months 1 to 2, another 17% in months 2 to 6, and then another 13% over 6 months' time of contacting people. So, but what we had was we had some people that were really easy to get hold of. So we get hold of them the first time we tried, but then we couldn't set the interview up, and it might take 6 months to actually sit down with them and do the interview because they were working or, other commitments. Or just sometimes you couldn't really work out what was going on and why they didn't want to arrange the date. But then some people were just really difficult to contact. And we spent months, as you say, Maureen was saying, going on Facebook or Badoo and different things trying to find them. But as soon as we found them, they said, oh yeah, I'll do the interview, no problem, and we'd get it done. This is just, I won't expect you to read all of this. This is just an example of a gentleman that I tracked, and it successfully. So it took 81 days from the date that I first tried to write to him to when I actually sat down and did the interview. So as you can see, I tried phoning on the number we had, didn't get any response. Tried again, no response. So then what we tended to do was to write a letter and just say, here's an appointment, I'm coming to see you on such and such a date. at whatever time, 11 o'clock. So I went there to find that he no longer lived in the property, but a lady did. So straight away I knew that he'd moved or something else had happened, because you can't assume that he's moved. He may have died or gone somewhere else or been in hospital. She couldn't give me any information, and I was sort of stuck at that point. So then I contacted the study link worker. But this is the person that he would have had contact with 5 years ago, but they didn't have any information, really. So we guessed that he wasn't back in touch with services. I think Maureen then did a search of the electoral roll, and then we thought, OK, this looks good. We found someone with the right name, which was a slightly unusual name, so we were hopeful it was him. But it was a care home, so we didn't really want to sort of just go running round to the care home without having tried to do a few other checks first. So then I went down to the to the archives, the local archives, where they keep the local, the sort of more recent indexes of deaths and births and marriages. You have to go on microfiche, which is a bit of a pain because it's quite time consuming. But I managed to search the recent indexes and he wasn't on there. So I thought, OK, he's alive. I'm pretty sure he's alive somewhere. Then we checked the chain database, which is a rough sleepers database, and again, there was no information on that. So basically, I'd run out of things to do, and the only alternative then was to try visiting the care home and seeing if it was him. Now, I actually hadn't interviewed this man the first time round, which was a bit of a problem because I didn't know what he looked like. So often you might go to somewhere and you recognise someone, and then it's much easier, isn't it, to sort of try and say, oh, yes, I remember you, you remember me, sort of thing. So anyway, I went to the care home and took the consent form and all the information and ID and all that sort of thing, and found that, yes, it was our man. So it was brilliant. But the thing was, he'd moved to another care home, I think, and so we sort of got the part of the address, and then we managed to work out where it was. And I walked round there. So then I walked to that place, because this is all, I allowed myself the day to sort of find this gentleman. So I then went to the next care home, and they said, oh, yes, he used to live here, and but actually he's moved somewhere else now. So, but we've got his address. So that was great. So then I went to the sheltered housing that he'd moved into, and he was living there, but he'd gone out shopping. So, which was lovely. I mean, I was so happy by this point. I was quite ecstatic, really. But, I'd actually found him. So then I just left a letter with him, for an appointment the next week. And lo and behold, he was waiting for me with a cup of tea and biscuits, when I turned up. And was, even though he'd never met me before, was still very happy to be interviewed. So it paid off. It was a bit long-winded, as is the story. But, we got there in the end. So this is just the final outcomes, really, of our work for the study. So as you can see, we managed to interview just under 80% of the sample. We contacted another 6% of people who said, I don't want to take part anymore. 5% had died, and then only 9.8% we couldn't trace at all. So we were pretty happy with those results. And really, our conclusions are that longitudinal studies such as this one are costly and time-consuming, but they do provide us with really rich data and good opportunities to get, find out about people, what's been happening with them, what the changes are over time, and what's influenced those changes. And you can engage vulnerable or marginalised people in research over a long time and maintain a low attrition rate as well. It is possible. But you do need to have researchers that are experienced and also people that can establish trust and positive relationships over time. I mean, you need to be very, as I say, very non-judgmental, very persistent, very patient. I mean, the non-judgmental thing, I just want to say one more thing about, really, which is that over the time, we had so many people saying, oh, I'll see you, I'll book the appointment, you get on the train, you go halfway around London or wherever it is to get to see them, take 2 hours on the tube, and then they'd phone you, and you text them on the way, I'm coming, oh, that's fine, and then you get there, and then, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I've got an appointment I've got to go to. And you just have to say, that's fine, that's all right, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter what you feel as the researcher, you've just got to go with it and say, that's fine, I'll see you another day. And that's how you make it work, basically. So, thank you. Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot to say the thanks to all the participants and other people that were involved in the study. And in case you're interested in our report and our policy briefings, they're available on our website at King's. We've got 5 different policy and practice briefings available, as well as a rather large report as well. So, thanks.
Thanks very much. Researcher stroke Sherlock Holmes, it sounds like. Very interesting. Right, is there any clarification questions at this stage? Anne-Marie.
I just wondered, I think it's amazing that how much work I was just saying how much work has gone into, recruiting some of your participants again at the 5-year mark. I just wondered how many of the ones that you finally, that 80% that you basically managed to recruit, how many of those did you have to put that level of work into? Because it's quite incredible.
Yeah. I don't know, Maureen. Yeah, do you want to? We had the thing, didn't we? Yeah. Let's go back to the. Yeah. I mean, as you can see, we had sort of 50
right,
just over half were quite easy to get hold of, really. So yeah, so say 50%, we had to put in quite a substantial amount of work to get them. But there were, we would imagine we weren't constantly. We would sort of do one thing with one participant, and then we'd do something with somebody else, leave a gap, see if something happened as a result of your intervention. And allow time. So that's also included in there as well. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
A couple of questions, one at the end and one in the middle.
Do you want to stand up, Maureen?
I'm really impressed that you did such a longitudinal study, and I just naively wondered if you'd done longitudinal work before, and whether you had appreciated both the costs in even like contacting people, the financial costs on transport costs, and the time to contact people when you started the project.
Yeah, I'd done a small longitudinal study before of older homeless people who were rehoused. I'd followed them for 2 years, but nothing on this scale at all. And with them, quite a few of them had gone into care homes and that. So often, if they did move, then we knew where they'd gone and that. But we just read about the work that'd been done in America and the success they'd had in keeping in contact with people. And from what we learned from them, I mean, we just believed it was possible. And yeah. Yeah, I mean, because we hadn't allowed for the length of time, because as Louise said, the study had to be extended a bit because we were still doing the field work when we should have been doing the reporting. We hadn't envisaged how long it was going to take to get some people.
But we felt optimistic, I think.
Yeah.
It was like we were sort of on. We had quite a few people that we knew. We were sort of in contact. These are the ones that we'd made contact with, but hadn't arranged the interview yet. So that's why we felt confident we would get more, which is why we got the extension. Yeah.
I think there was another question in the middle. Lady in the grey.
Yes, I mean, in addition to semi-structured interviewing, did you use any qualitative live
Measures, like more quantitative measures?
Yeah, not really. We'd got a semi-structured questionnaire. We'd used some questions from other scales that we'd built into the semi-structured questionnaire.
Did we do qualitative live?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. We sort of built it in from different instruments and that.
So, I mean, which qualitative life measure did you use?
It was one Anne Bowling had used, where she asked one question and then asked them to actually say, what was it? What things are positive? What things give quality to your life? What things are problematic? And what could help improve it? And if you actually look at the report, we've got in there the tables of their responses as to what things gave quality to their lives and what things would improve the quality of their lives.
So what's it called again? I didn't hear.
Pardon?
I didn't hear what it was called.
It was Anne Bowling. She'd used open-ended questions, which we then used.
And you found that a sensitive measure to use? Or, it correlated with your
semi-structured interviewing?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Actually, that takes us quite nicely into Anne-Marie's presentation, who's going to talk about measuring outcomes. In this case, the challenges of doing so for people in care homes and people with cognitive impairment.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about measuring outcomes in care homes. So just to give you a little overview of the presentation itself, I'm going to start by, for those of you that aren't familiar, giving you an overview of the Adult Social Care Outcomes Toolkit, and in particular the care homes version of that toolkit. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how and why the approach works for people with dementia in care homes. And then update you on some of the methodological developments that we're undertaking now as part of some new SSCR work. And finally, I'm going to talk about the way that we're having impact with this work, which is about the sort of, going back to that word flexible, the flexible way that we're having to work with providers and that we're adapting the tool. And although that's not part of the SSCR study, I thought it linked quite closely and it has sort of built on previous SSCR work. So before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge the current team, some of whom are here today. So it's my colleague Nick Smith and Sinead Palmer, Grace Collins and Julian Forder. And I have to say that some of these slides have mixed and matched from previous presentations, so thank you to some of them. Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar, the Adult Social Care Outcomes Toolkit is actually a set of tools for measuring quality of life for people who use social care. And we've actually got 3 existing versions of that toolkit. One is an interview version called INT4. One is designed for self-completion, so things like postal surveys and so on, questionnaires. And finally, we have the Mixed Methods Toolkit. And as part of some new projects that we've been doing that are coming towards an end, we have now got a proxy measure, which can go out in sort of surveys and so on and be used where the person can't complete a survey themselves. We also have a new easy read version of ASCOT, which has been cognitively tested and could be used now if people are interested, and will be included hopefully next year in the Adult Social Care Survey. And we have an ASCOT carer measure, which is an interview and self-completion format, which measures not the quality of life of the service user, but their informal or unpaid family carers' quality of life. And many of the domains do complement those that are included in the main ASCOT measure. So ASCOT measures quality of life according to 8 domains, and here they are. We've got what we call sort of the basic domains of quality of life, so personal cleanliness and comfort, food and drink, safety and accommodation cleanliness and comfort. And then we've got what we refer to as higher order domains. So this is the more aspirational, I suppose, what you might call real quality of life domains, like control over daily life, social participation and involvement, and occupation. And finally, the 8th domain is dignity. And dignity in ASCOT looks at the way in which you're treated, so by care staff, how that makes you feel, so that impact on your sense of significance. And what I really want to focus on today, which relates to the SSCR work that we've been doing, is the CH3, the care homes method. Now, unlike the other toolkits, which tend to be self-response, the Mixed Methods Toolkit actually triangulates the evidence by collecting residents' views themselves where they're able, and again, the word flexible, in a flexible way, so people sometimes can tell you an awful lot, sometimes can tell you very little about their own quality of life. Structured observation, which is a key element of this particular toolkit. And we also we do a structured interview with staff, and we also do interviews with family members where they're available. And those interviews with staff and family members are very much proxy quality of life measures, where we're asking them to judge how the person feels, how the service user feels, but of course it is a proxy rating. And what we do is we take the evidence that we've collected through those different strands, and we don't just take the view of the proxy or rely only on the observation. What we do is we triangulate that evidence, and we have a 2-day training course which works through how you would do this, and you use the evidence that you've gathered, and sometimes that requires some trading off, which can be quite difficult, and then you make a decision about where you think that person's quality of life is. And what you're trying to do is represent as accurate as possible how you think the person themselves is feeling, which is quite a challenge actually. But what we found, we did as part of our last SSCR study, is that we used it within our ASCOT team, if you like, and we found that actually excellent inter-rater reliability is possible. So we got a score of 0.77, and I think over 0.75 is considered excellent. But it does require training. And if you're a researcher and you're interested in using this, then I would recommend that you come on the course and then also build into your study time to work together and make sure you're getting good inter-rater reliability before people go off and use it individually. So why use CH3 as a method? Well, as I mentioned briefly a moment ago, the usual kind of PROM format, so which is often interviews or self-completion, is not very dementia-friendly once you get into the moderate to advanced stages of dementia. And of course, when we're talking about care homes, which is what this toolkit was designed for, very often you're finding the level of cognitive impairment is sufficiently poor that actually they would struggle to complete a survey themselves or even give a very structured response in that kind of interview. So we designed this methodology as a mechanism for collecting that data, but also attempting to give the person with dementia a voice themselves. I think one of the advantages to this toolkit is that because you are collecting such a diverse range of evidence, although it does lead to long data collection times, it also gives you very rich qualitative data alongside those scores. And that's something that we found really interesting ourselves from looking at, I suppose, the reasoning and the validity of the ratings that we're giving, but also in terms of feeding that information back to providers, which is something that we did in our last SSCR study. This is something that we've reflected on a paper that is under peer review at the moment. And this is the feedback. I did a debrief interview with one of the care home managers that we gave the feedback to. So we collected outcomes data using this method, and then we fed that back at a sort of aggregate level. And we found that managers were very, we fed it back to care staff as well, were very receptive, but particularly the managers could see lots of ways in which they could use this data. And in particular, this particular home, in between us carrying out the original data collection and doing the feedback, had a very difficult CQC inspection. And they were able to use the data that we'd given them and the feedback we'd given them to say to the CQC inspectors, well, actually, we're working on this. We've had some researchers coming in and we are committed to improving quality, and this is what we're going to do to overcome that. So I think actually it's something that providers are starting to become very interested in, and I'll come back to that at the end. So before I go on to the sort of developments, I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of the new work that we're doing. We're currently conducting an SSCR study examining the relationship between quality, looking at ASCOT ratings, so quality of life, and the regulator ratings. We're recruiting 30 care homes for older people. I think we've got roughly 12, I think, at the moment. More? Yes, more, good. Already signed up for the study. And thinking again back to Jill's presentation, we started off by doing a random selection, and we are already having a snowballing effect. So what we're finding is that some providers that were selected, a home of theirs was selected for as part of the random selection process initially, and then they're saying, actually, we've got other homes that we'd really like to put forwards. And anyone that's done research with care homes know you don't say no when a care home's volunteering. So we will maybe end up with more homes than 30. We're aiming for 10 residents per home, and we are including people who lack the capacity to consent, and we have been through ethics for this. We're collecting resident data on their residents' health, their needs and characteristics. We're also collecting data, if we can, and this is something we found really problematic in the past, we're collecting data about the fees that they're paying and their outcomes, because obviously those are all variables that we might want to include in the analysis. And then we're also collecting information about staff characteristics and their motivations for care work, and the CQC ratings for the homes. So alongside the kind of theoretical work that we're looking at, the quality and the ratings, we're also going to use this as an opportunity to do some methodological work. One of the big things that anyone that's familiar with ASCOT will know is that the care homes toolkit traditionally has stood slightly apart from the other ASCOT measures, in that all the other ASCOT measures have 4 outcome states per domain, whereas the care homes measure has only had 3. The 4 level outcome states are that somebody's needs are met in an ideal state, which means that their preferences are being met. Then the next level would be that there are no needs, which means that it's okay, a kind of mustn't grumble. And then that there are some needs which would affect their quality of life, or high needs in that domain, which would mean that it would be having either a mental or physical impact on their health. And what we did with CH3 when we originally developed this mixed methods toolkit is we kind of collapsed the ideal state and the no need state that's in the other measures into one. And we did that because we thought methodologically it was going to be really difficult to judge whether someone's needs are being met, but not just being met, are they being met at that level that meets their own preferences if we're relying on such a mixed methods approach. However, as we've gone on and we've used it and we've realised our inter-rater reliability is very good for this measure, we've started to reflect on could we extend this toolkit so that we also measure outcomes in the 4 outcome states for each domain so that it's more equivocal to the other ASCOT tools. And this is something that providers are particularly interested in because they are interested in having this kind of more aspirational quality of life focus, whereby they can say when they're going above and beyond, not just meeting people's needs, but doing something that's a bit more person-centred and reaching people's goals. And they see that ideal state as being reflective of that. So that was our challenge. Can we do this? So what we've done for the new study is that we've increased all the interview schedules that we include with staff and family members, and we've made those to 4 level to match the other ASCOT tools. And we're now including that in our observations as well. So rather than just observing and making notes about whether, yes, we think this person's needs are being met in that domain, we're now looking for the, if you like, the detail. So can we observe when it is going beyond just meeting needs and meeting preferences as well? So these are the kind of things methodologically that we're having to think about within that kind of observational framework. People's emotional responses. It sounds obvious, but actually that can tell you an awful lot. So if somebody's engaged in an activity or is doing something with a member of staff, then looking for things like smiling and laughter, but also equally looking for the signs that they're not happy, so distress, challenging behaviour, and the other things that go alongside that. Personalisation. So are the rooms personalised? In what way and to what extent? If you can look at enough different rooms in a home, you soon start to get an impression as to whether it's just a nice room or whether it's very personalised and might be meeting individuals' preferences. And that goes according to their appearances, their dress, and also we're looking for diversity. We've been in homes before where you've at first glance you go, oh, that's nice, so-and-so's got their nails painted. Also, oh, they've all got their nails painted and all painted the same colour. So then you start to get a little bit more suspicious about whether or not that really is about meeting people's preferences or not. Choice and variety in meal times. Traditionally, when we go into homes, we tend to find that everybody is taken down into the dining room to eat at exactly the same time, all together, regardless. They might have some choice over what they're eating, but actually some homes are going above and beyond and they're doing something a little bit special, and the ideal state for the food and drink domain might be around that. So it might be around the fact that Mrs. Smith likes to have her lunch at 1 o'clock, not at 12 o'clock. So our home's going above and beyond, and that's what that ideal state will be trying to get at. And we'll be looking for evidence of that, basically. And ideally, we want to have the resident's voice too, but this is something that we have historically found quite challenging in care homes. And that leads us on to the sort of development too. Although this mixed methods approach does include semi-structured or very qualitative interviews, sometimes which just become a basic chat about what's happening in the here and now, and that's the level at which we've been able to engage with people from their own perspectives of quality of life. We wanted to do something a little bit more concrete and try and give people living with dementia a greater voice in this mixed methods toolkit. So we don't see this as a standalone ASCOT tool, but maybe as part of that mixed methods approach. And what we've done is that we've done some work with the team at Stirling University who developed a communication tool called Talking Mats. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. And Talking Mats is basically a method of communication that uses symbols to help people engage in conversation with you. And it's quite nice because you can photograph the end result, and that can feed back into things like care plans. It can be used for further analysis down the line so that that data doesn't get lost. And within our 30 homes, we're hoping for around 300 residents. About 30 of those we plan to pilot the Talking Mats approach with. So here's an example mat. This isn't an Ascot mat, this is just an example mat to make you aware of how this might work. And as you can see, it literally is a mat. So you can use an iPad form, or you can use a simple, doormat, preferably clean. And you start off by introducing your topic. So you might sit down with the person, put the mat out in front of them and say, hi, I really want to talk to you today a little bit about how you want to spend your time. They call it leisure here, but we might say how you want to spend your time at home during the day, the things that you enjoy and the things that you don't enjoy doing. And what I'd like to do is ask you, I'm going to show you some symbols or some pictures, and what I would really like you to do is tell me whether you really enjoy doing this, and you would put down the thumbs up, whether you really don't enjoy doing this, and you would put down the thumbs down, or whether you're not sure how you feel about it, and you put the other one. So you introduce your top scale to them, which is the thumbs up, thumbs down. And you might have to repeat that for somebody and go through that with them again. And then what you start to do is and hopefully in advance you've planned your conversation with them, so you've got your cards in a sensible order, that you go through with that person and say, so tell me, and you keep reiterating that top scale. How do you feel about cooking? Is that something that you enjoy, do you not enjoy, or are you unsure? And the person can hold the symbol, look at it, take their time and place it on the mat where in a way that reflects how they feel about that activity. And slowly you start to build up a picture. And sometimes what happens is that in placing that symbol, they start to talk about it as well. So you're not just getting, I like it, I don't like it. You're also getting the data that goes alongside that, so the conversation that leads to. So what we're planning to do with Ascot is use this approach, but around the Ascot domains. So it won't give you outcome states per se, but it will hopefully give the person with dementia a greater opportunity to feed into that evidence base and add to that data that we're collecting so that their voice is a little bit stronger in the final ratings. So I mentioned at the start that I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the developments that we're working with providers. We found in previous work that the data was really helpful to providers, and that actually to have the biggest impact on the quality of life of the people using the care homes and living in care homes, it needed to have some mechanism for feeding back sort of both to the manager but also to the care staff themselves. And actually providers don't have the capacity to do these really lengthy special exercises collecting data where they do lengthy observations, interviews, and it's quite a big body of work for them to be collecting on a routine basis. So what we're doing is we're working with a big care provider here in the UK and also a care provider in Australia to look at how they can integrate Ascot into their kind of routine care planning conversations. And we've had to be really flexible about the method, and in fact they're using similar but slightly different methods. So in the UK provider goes across people with intellectual disabilities, but also older adults, and they're going to be focusing only on current quality of life now, so talking to the person about the 8 domains, how they feel about their lives now. And they're going to be using what they call as a circle of support. So when they have their care planning meetings, there'll be the person using the service, it may be an informal care like a family member, a member of staff, and maybe if there's a manager or a registered nurse will be involved. Sometimes it might be somebody who's involved in safeguarding. So whoever needs to be involved in those care planning conversations will be there. And together around that table, supporting the person depending on their needs, because they're going to have a variety of different needs, they will try and complete the Ascot interviews together. So rather than use a mixed methods approach, they're using a collective approach to try and complete the more quantitative tick box data. And rather than just take that data and then report how well they're doing and what they're doing in the service, by integrating it into care planning, the idea is that they will use that as a conversation starter. And what we found from the pilot feedback so far from Australia is that already they're finding it's revealing things that they didn't know. For example, they had a gentleman come in, they completely missed that he was supposed to be on a certain sort of medication, and that had been completely missed and not been, when he moved in, it wasn't passed over. And actually a conversation came out of Ascot and that led to them, I'm being hurried up, so that led to them feeding that back in and it hopefully improving outcomes. So you can see how over time it might build up some data and hopefully influence care. So, final slide. Just to summarise then, it's methodologically challenging to measure outcomes in care homes because of the level of physical frailty and the high levels of cognitive impairment. That, again, the methods need to be flexible and draw on various sources to get a full picture. And that hopefully some of the issues that we have highlighted we are starting to address under the new research, and that we're working with providers to find better ways to improve impact. And the disclaimer at the end.
Sorry, I've done a terrible chairing job as usual. Fantastic presentations, but trying to ask academics to stick to 10 minutes is like trying to herd cats, I think, generally. But if people are happy to stay for a couple more minutes and have questions for Anne-Marie, then please fire away. You seem to be eager for tea.
I think so.
All right, so thanks very much to our speakers. I'm going to thank them again and look forward to the plenary sessions in about 20 minutes.